Hey, Shalom, Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashim Yahushai, Ba'ashim Makakadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwath and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick on Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to do just essentially a lesson in regards to the these talking points that are coming out about so-called black people, how they're seen by the so-called Japanese people, right? And I want to read a couple and see if I could find some of the tweets, because they're basically comparing so-called black people to the a fictional group of people within a show called Invincible known as the Viltrumites. Now, brothers, I haven't personally seen the show, but from what I've heard, they tend to be a very strong, mighty, people conquering, group of people, right? And I just, what I basically heard was a lot of commentary. Jake doesn't understand, why they think like this. Just in regards to, our people in the world, they don't understand, why, these so-called Japanese people see them as so much of a threat, see them as, super duper strong. It's really our people that don't see and perceive their own strength, because we are the ones that are completely lost, and we have forgotten our resting place, we've forgotten our heritage. So I want to read a couple things in regards to what they were saying, and then I want to get a couple precepts. Let me see, hold on. So these were some of the things that we're saying about so-called black people, right? And it's pretty much the Israelites. They're discussing you so-called blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, and you speckled birds who go back to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? And it says here, this is one of the tweets I saw, and it says the number of encounters with black people in my neighborhood is steadily increasing. It says their skeletal structure and their way their muscles are built on a completely different level from Japanese people. It says I am slim, so if I got pinned down, it'll be over in seconds. I never imagined that violence would come from a foreigner would climb the ranks in my predictions for my own cause of death. It says I couldn't have pictured that even a few years ago. Things change when you least expect them to, right? So these are some of the things that they're saying about, excuse me, of how they have allegedly view, you so-called blacks, you so-called Negroes, in Japan. Let me see if I find another one. There was another one that was very interesting. They said how basically they were saying where they how this the white people dropped bombs on them, but they still have more of a fear of the black people that are coming in within Japan. Right, let me see if I just find another one real quick, and then I'll add some scripts in there. Okay, here's another one, and it says, I get it. Even in my neighborhood and on the train, a number of black people have definitely increased. Above all, their builds are just so different. The moment I see them, I think, oh, no matter how you slice it, Japanese people can't compete with that. Even the women, despite having similar heights, have this thickness and weight class vibe from another world entirely. When I imagine getting punched by one and thinking I might die from a single blow, it fills me with this unbearable fear, right? So when they're coming into contact with a lot of these, Israelites within Japan, there's a certain level of fear that these heathens are experiencing, because, ultimately, we are a stronger people, right? And it's only our people that haven't really come to the grips of that. Speaking about these YouTubers are making their commentary and so on and so forth, right? So let me go to the beginning. So let me go to Genesis, right? To show that we are ultimately are a strong people. So just bear with me on this. Let me just open this real quick. Genesis 25. Okay, I'll start at verse 20. I'll start at verse 21, and it says, this is Genesis chapter 25, verse 21. And it says, and Isaac entreated of the Lord Yahweh for his wife, because she was barren, and the Lord Yahweh was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. So this is going into the story of basically Jacob and Esau, basically, right? So Jacob, eventually his name would be changed to Israel, and eventually he would beget 12 sons, right, which becomes the 12 tribes of Israel, right? So it says here, verse 22, and it says, and the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And it says here, and when her days to be fulfilled, behold, they were twins in her womb. So this is going into, like I said before, Jacob and Esau. And this is verse 25, and it says, and the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau, right? So Esau was the first, and then Jacob, and the other brother, and after his brother came on and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them, right? So this is basically the birth of Jacob and as well as Esau. So Esau would eventually, his nation would be known as the Edomites, right? And Jacob, as I said before, he would be known, his descendants would be known as the Israelites, right? So you Israelites you go back to this particular seed, this particular man, right? And the Lord made a covenant from Abraham, Isaac unto Jacob, and he had not dealt so with any other nation, right? So this is essentially the beginning, and we are essentially a stronger people. That's why we're built a lot different. And you see the way our people, whether they play sports, they excel in in the different various arenas that they're put in, whether it might be in academics. They excel in especially our people are very good musicians, because they have they have a special, they're essentially more nigh unto the Most High than these other nations. And these other nations are basically as they're as nothing, like it says in Second Ezra, right? So we are built like a completely different, from these other nations. We have more of a whether it's in our stature, it's in our style, it's in the way we dress, the way we present ourselves, that comes out, right? So let's go to and Jake needs to understand that the Lord didn't create nations to all be equal, because that whole equality is really just understanding of this world, which is not true. The Lord really truly is, he's essentially a separatist, right? He separated the different nations, right? And basically he made one nation above all the other nations. So I want to read this here. This is Deuteronomy chapter 7 verse 6, and it says here, for thou art a holy people unto the Lord Yahweh thy power, The Lord Yahweh thy power hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all the people that are upon the face of the earth, right? So this is the vibration that they're picking up on. These other nations, they're picking up on the fact that we're essentially we're above them. And it's true, we are above them, right? They have their place, right? Just like you Israelites have your place. You Israelites are your royalty. You are essentially the creme de la creme of nations, right? But because we follow the ways of the different heathen, a lot of us don't behave as such, because in the scriptures it says that the Lord created us to be essentially a noble vine and a holy and a right seed. But because we follow the ways of the other heathens, and learn their ways, we become essentially as a degenerate plant of a strange vine. But ultimately we are a royal and noble people. Let's get the word noble. So this is noble in the etymology, and it says illustrious. It says distinguished, of high rank, of birth. It says from the Latin, it says nobilis, well known, famous, renowned. I believe that's how the sons of God were actually described as in Genesis as well. They were men of renown. They had a reputation, right? That they had a good name, right? It says here excellent, superior, splendid, highborn, of superior birth, right? To come to know, it says to know, well known. It says distinguished by splendor, magnificence, stateliness. It says worthy of honor and respect, having lofty character, of having high moral qualities. And that's pretty much how the Lord created us to be essentially upright and having high moral qualities. As a matter of fact, let me read this real quick. I'm going to go back here. This is Genesis 25 verse 27, since I read that. So it says, and the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter and a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents, right? So when you go into that word plain, I'm going to get it real quick. Okay, so here it says plain is thumb. It says here pious, specifically gentle. It says complete, perfect. One who lacks nothing in physical strength, beauty, sound, wholesome, right? Morally innocent, having integrity, complete. One who is morally and ethically pure, right? So this is how we're supposed to be. This is the elk and the kind of people that we come from. We come from a noble, we're a kingdom of kings and priests, right? We're upright individuals, right? So, and even in the different captivities, we shun, a lot of our forefathers in the different various captivities where we were at, we because we were so close to Yahweh Bash and Yahweh Shai, we stood out. We were actually more well favored because of that, right? Because of the wisdom that the Lord gave to us as a people, and didn't give that, didn't have that close, intimate relationship with all these other nations. Only us, we had that, right? And have that, continue to have that, right? So it says here, I want to get an example of that, actually. I want to get two examples, actually. Hold on. This is actually, I want to read this thing and I want to get my example. This says here, this is Deuteronomy 4 verse 6, and it says, keep therefore and do them regarding the law, statutes, and commandments, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the other nations, which shall hear these statutes and say, Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. And what nation is there so great, hath the Most High so nigh unto them, that the Lord our power is in all things that we may call upon him for? And what nation is there so great, that hath statutes and judgments so righteous as in this law, which I set before you this day, right? So this is important, right? Because we are essentially a noble people, right? The nations are supposed to look to us as a trendsetter in righteousness. So I wanted to get one example. Let me read this, because they have a certain level of like fear, right? And sometimes all these other nations, they see Jake from one lens, in terms of like they kind of see you more as the entertainers, but there's a lot more to us as a people than what is actually shown on TV, right? They don't see the essentially the intellectual, the morally upright side of our people. They kind of see more them as entertainers, right? Yes, a lot of our people are they excel as good entertainers, but that's not the limitations to who we are as a people, right? So it says here, I want to read this in Daniel. So this is Daniel chapter 6, because I wanted to read this to show that we're a lot more than what is presented on TV, right? This is Daniel chapter 6, verse 1. And it says here, and it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom of 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, whom Daniel was the first, and the princes might give account unto them, and the king should have no damage. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and the princes, because of an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. So even in captivity, in these various different captivities, we shun a lot, whether it was in we still stood out, amongst these different heathens, whether it was in Babylon, whether it was in the Achaemenid Empire, whether it was in Greece, whether it was in Rome, Jake would essentially rise up in the ranks. They would maybe rise up in the military. Even in like the later years after the 12 Caesars in ancient Rome, you had some emperors known as the 5 good emperors, if I'm not mistaken, and it was one of them was named Marcus Aurelius, right? Even in the Dark Ages, when we were being known as so-called Moors, we taught the other nations like how to bathe properly. They established universities and so on and so forth, right? So Jake is essentially, as the scriptures say, we are the former of all things. So Jake has a special talent, and they excel in certain avenues, in multiple different avenues, where they're actually to be more prosperous, because we are the people that are so nigh unto Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua, right? So this is verse 4, and it says here, then the presidents and the princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could not find occasion nor fault, for as much he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him, right? So they were trying to find fault, with Daniel, because he was on point. Essentially, Daniel was on point with his power, right? He was on point with Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua. Let me get that word, excellent. Excellent. So it says, distinguished for superior merit of any kind, of surpassing character or quality, uncommonly valuable for any reason, remarkably good. It says outstanding. It says prominent, towering, distinguished, superior, surpassing, right? Superior, right? So this is the vibration that these other nations are feeling. Of course, they're seeing Jake. They're seeing you so-called black people, Native Americans and Hispanics. They're kind of seeing you more in terms of stature. So they're seeing you, kind of like, oh, your bones are, more dense. Your facial structure, you have more of an austere look. They're looking at your complexion. You look very, very different, and you can't hide yourself amongst these other nations, right? So, you Israelites tend to stand out. It says here, high, lofty, great, to be prominent, right? So, you Israelites tend to, you stand out in the midst of all these other nations, right? You can't hide yourself, right? But this is, knowing these things is very, very important, because our people don't understand the value of actually knowing their history, right? And now you're seeing this, the other nations are, kind of like, speaking on it, and speaking in regards to feeling kind of like nervous and scared, because, and ultimately they really should be, because they are not the ones that truly should be in power. Jake is naturally, what's it called? It's naturally a person who should be, in authority, right? They're naturally, entrepreneurial, right? But our people, they've been in captivity so long, so they don't even think very well of themselves. Esau has essentially deceived them. After those 1,000 years, like it says in Revelation, you shall go out to deceive the nations, right? Not only did he deceive the images of how our Lord and Savior looked, he also deceived how the actual judges, looked, right? So our people don't think of themselves as a superior, morally upright group of people. They think of themselves as peasants. They think of themselves as niggas. They think of themselves as, they're homeborn. They think of themselves as slaves, right? And they esteem their slave master more than themselves, right? So, I'll get one more example. Let me go to, what's that? Genesis. No. I'll just get straight to the point. This is Genesis chapter 41, verse 42. And it says, and Pharaoh took his ring off of his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck, and made him to ride second chariot which he had, and cried before him, bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, with all these shall no man lift up his hand or foot in the land of Egypt. And the Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and gave him his wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. And Joseph went all over the land of Egypt, right? And I'm reading this because when you go through his story, basically Joseph, he gets sold into like slavery, ends up in Egypt. But Joseph had essentially a talent, of being able to properly interpret dreams, right? So when you go through this story, you realize that there was a moment where the Pharaoh had a dream, and he didn't have someone to basically give a proper interpretation. And fortunately, there was a Hebrew that was in prison at the time, and it was Joseph, right? So Joseph basically gives the Pharaoh the proper interpretation, right? And eventually he gets elevated, because I'm reading this to kind of give an understanding of like not just the history of our forefathers, but also an understanding that we're a lot more. This is another reason why we're a lot more superior than these other nations, because Joseph was very nigh unto the Lord, right? And he had the ability to give proper interpretations of the Pharaoh's dream, right? And eventually he was able to actually give the Pharaoh a proper action plan of what to do with the certain resources, because they will go through a period of time of famine. So, he had counsel from the heavens, so he was able to actually, manage back and forth on what to actually do. Let's stock up, and during these years of plentifulness, and let's let's manage what we have during those times of famine, so to speak, right? So it's a very, very good story. But the point really is that this is another way, and you see how we were superior within these other nations because of us, right? It's the same thing in America. When you think about the Super Bowl, you think about the NFL, you think about certain inventions. America wouldn't be on the platform so great because of is a lot of it is due to the contributions of our people. These nations, these captivities, they excel because they know how to use our people, and our people are very profitable in these other empires where they were scattered to, right? So you know anyways, I'll leave the lesson there. There's more examples of this, but just wanted to bring this out because I thought this was very interesting. But Lord's will, this was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.